Hello again. There was a time, and not all that long ago either, when a university student talking about his therapist would have been referring to somebody treating an injury he had received during a game of rugby. These days, of course, we know at once that it is not his physical health to which he refers, but his psychological or spiritual well-being. The need for such therapy can be brought on by something as trifling as reading the wrong book or hearing somebody express views with which he disagrees, which accounts, of course, for the modern practice of trigger warnings. Heaven forbid that a young person going to university should come across authors or, even worse, real-life human beings who hold very different views and opinions from their own. This is sure to cause trauma and unhappiness, resulting in the need for counselling. Older readers will wonder what has brought the younger generation to such a pass, when even a copy of a book like Jane Eyre must be surrounded with warning notices as though it were an unexploded bomb. It has been a gradual process which began as early as the 1970s and has lately gained pace until we can scarcely keep up with all the new developments. Adolescence was, until a few decades ago, seen as a time for breaking free of boundaries and exploring the world both physically and intellectually. The late teens and early 20s were often the high water point of this exploration, which entailed learning to cope with alcohol, drugs, sex, violence, work, and also, perhaps more importantly, how to deal with new ideas and the realisation that adulthood was really upon one. In short, it meant a time to grow up and leave childhood behind. This is not at all how this stage in human development is now regarded, of course. These days we see young people as vulnerable and fragile little creatures, whom even a loud noise is likely to startle and disturb. As for being contradicted, or exposed to robust opinions or ribald humour, these are things from which they must be protected at all costs. This new attitude towards young people, seeing them as being in need of cosseting and careful care, is a natural extension in some ways to a trend which has been visible for years. This is the lengthening of childhood and encouraging children to continue to rely on their parents for far longer than was the case when the parents themselves were children. The so-called school run is a wonderful example of this. In 1971, more than 80% of 7 and 8-year-olds walked to school alone. 20 years later, this figure had fallen below 10%. Today, anybody who saw a 7-year-old walking to school by himself would probably be ringing social services to report the parent. Instead, children are chauffeured to school in their parents' cars. The world is far too dangerous for primary school children to be exposed to it without an adult on hand to protect them. What if they should be abducted and murdered by a stranger? This is, of course, the kind of thing that parents today worry about, the bogeyman of stranger danger. Never mind that the chances of a child under the age of 14 being murdered by a complete stranger are roughly the same as he or she being struck by lightning. The risk must essentially be reduced to zero. In the description to this video, I give a link to a piece I wrote about this subject many years ago. I wrote at the time, 20 years ago in fact, some experts are concerned about the harm this smothering protection is doing to children's developing social skills. Prescient or what? It is this prolonged infancy which produces adolescents who are incapable of coping with challenges or unexpected situations. Because children today are seldom allowed to roam about unsupervised, they do not have the opportunity to develop their own coping strategies and they always look to an older person to guard them from unpleasant things. They do not even learn to cross the road by themselves until they are of secondary school age. Even then, some parents still drive their children to and from school. Most secondary schools have lines of vehicles waiting outside at the end of the school day. It is childhood, in childhood, that the roots of anxiety and insecurity, the viewing of the world as a scary and threatening place, are now established. Every disagreeable experience must be solved by others, and while one quite understands parents feeling this way, it often has the effect of creating fearful and neurotic teenagers who cannot even cope when they hear somebody disagreeing with them too forcefully. I tried yesterday to explain some of this need to acquire resilience and the ability to cope with unpleasant people and unfortunate events, but all that happened was that I ended up being accused of being a paedophile, so I'd best not go down that road again. If people are really interested to know, though, why they see so many young people today who are delicate and easily frightened, and who, even if they are at university, need to be looked after and spoon-fed, it is at their childhoods that one must look. I think that the current approach to childhood is utterly disastrous for the children themselves, and leaves them ill-prepared to tackle even something as innocuous as a person who disagrees with them. This is a terrible condition to be in, as is a state of affairs when many young people think that they require treatment by mental health specialists for various neuroses, the current mania for counselling and therapy. For my own part, I am immensely grateful that I grew to adulthood at a time when it was expected that childhood would be a time for learning about the world and learning how to manage setbacks and unpleasant encounters with others. It has enabled me to deal with most of what I come across these days with humour and without anxiety.